Okay. We are rolling. Today is, hold on, let me just get this for the record. Today is
Monday.
Monday,
The
the
5th of July.
of the 1st,
Of January. 2015.
2015.
Yippee.
And we are with Stanley in your house in Raanana. This is our second meeting. And we are talking to you about your life story and most specifically about your experiences in Israel, in Palestine, well, in Israel. In Israel, you got here when it was already Israel. In Machal, and we left off yesterday with you arriving in Palestine, in Israel,
Haifa.
in August of 1948. Now, just to freshen your memory, I'm going to remind you about what we talked about. The last few things.
I think actually I landed probably September the 1st.
You think it was September the 1st?
It was August. I was in Marseille.
It says that you left from the SS Mala.
Yes.
You told me that there were not really significant things happened on the voyage. Nothing really significant.
Well, there was a storm and there was an engine breakdown,
Right.
so it took 10 days. But otherwise, it went as planned.
Okay. And then it says that we talked about the DP camp that you were in also before. And then we talked about, okay, so let's say you said here around the end of August, let's say September 1st,
Yes.
you arrive in Israel,
and
the
Haifa.
newly state of Israel.
Yeah.
Israel in September is, the second truce is over, war is back on full time.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about your first moments. What port did you get in?
Landed in Haifa, and I don't know if we stayed overnight in Haifa, but I know very soon afterwards I was taken and driven down to Tel Aviv, to the army headquarters, to the recruitment office, I guess. And there I was signed on to the IDF.
Already the IDF was an IDF.
It was with the IDF,
Yeah.
yes. This was long after after Lena and all that. And I was then assigned to go back to Haifa to work in the number 10 military hospital, which was based on the Italian hospital in Haifa. The Italian hospital was run by nuns, but it had been taken over by the British Mandate forces. And then after the declaration of the state, it became number 10 military hospital.
Okay, so wait a sec. So a lot of information you told me there, and I want to try and break some of it down.
Okay.
Okay? So you say that do you remember where they took you from Haifa, where they took you to the recruitment center?
They took me from Haifa to Tel Aviv.
And from Tel Aviv, they take you back to Haifa?
Well, I signed on. I was enrolled in Tel Aviv into the army.
Okay, do you remember getting inducted into the army? Do you remember getting an ID number, a uniform, a gun, ranks?
I was given an ID number.
Okay.
And probably a uniform of some sort.
Yeah.
But it wasn't anything formal. It would be in shorts and shirts.
Do you get a rank?
Officially, yes, second lieutenant, but they didn't have the pips at that time.
What's a pip?
Pips are the little signals that went on the shirt too. They came later. Officially, I was ranked first lieutenant.
First lieutenant is a Segen. Segen, it's 2 bars.
2 bars.
2 bars, Segen, yeah.
The nurses were 1 bar.
Uh-huh.
I guess we had some kind of caps. I don't remember what.
Didn't they teach you how to shoot a gun?
No.
No.
No, I was strictly medical in the hospital.
So you don't really remember a lot of the inauguration into the IDF. You just
There was no formal ceremony.
Yeah. No, I understand, but like, did they make you swear on the Bible? Did they make you?
I don't recall any oath or anything. I would just sign on.
And then they decide to send you back to Haifa.
Yes.
To an Italian hospital.
It was originally the Italian hospital, but it was the number 10 military hospital of the IDF.
Do you know what it was called in Hebrew?
Well, Beit Cholim Mispat Esser.
Beit Cholim Mispat Esser, okay. Mispat Esser, and it's in Haifa?
It's in Haifa.
Okay, I'll try and see if I can find it. So
it's downtown, near Bad Galim.
Near Bad Galim, okay. So you get there to the hospital. Israel's at war.
It was actually a truce at the time, but there was still a war.
There was a truce at the time, yeah? There was still a truce going on?
There was still a truce. There was another action subsequently.
But we all know that this truce is very fragile and delicate,
yes.
And you know... so you get to the hospital. What's your first impression of the hospital when you get there?
Well, I guess meeting some of the personnel, some of the staff, particularly young South Africans. One couple I remember we befriended, particularly Jerry and Ruth Landsman from South Africa. He was a young general practitioner, and Ruth, his wife, was an X-ray technician. There were South African pharmacists, I remember, and then there were the senior staff. The head of the surgery was a surgeon named Jack Wilton. The head of anesthesia was a guy named Meltzer, also South African. The head of the orthopedic surgical unit under Wilton was another South African named Cyril Kaplan, a young man, good-looking boy.
I heard the name.
Cyril Kaplan, and he was really my chief. He was the one that I worked under. He subsequently we went to New York, was practicing in New York, and I had later a contact with him. The administration of the hospital was by a European surgeon, or a doctor rather, Lundfish, I think was his name. And the hospital was, as I recall, was really just getting underway. It wasn't fully established or running smoothly. Of course, there were nurses, there were Israeli nurses and immigrant people from South Africa and England. One particular coincidence: before going to Israel, I needed to get some shots, some vaccinations. And although I was at that time working in a hospital outside of London, I was doing my internship, I went to the emergency department of University College Hospital where I had studied, and there I had the injection, the inoculation, whatever it was. the nurse that gave it me was, of course, an English girl. This is in London, named Ethel Kurland. I had the injection. I don't think we discussed why I was having an injection, but that's what I had, and then I left and went to Israel. When I got to Haifa, who do I meet? Ethel Kurland. Of course, she remembered me, and then she understood why I had been gone there for the injection. Subsequently, Ethel and the husband that she later married went to Canada, and we were very close to them, especially the year I spent in Montreal, because they were living in Montreal. So, but that was an extraordinary coincidence. Anyway, in the hospital, I was assigned a room which I shared with a young South African doctor. His father was a prominent lawyer in South Africa. He himself was, I think, a newly qualified doctor. And then we started routine work. We're looking after patients and operating. Now,
this is a military hospital.
It's a military hospital, yes. The building, the Italian hospital, which was a sizable permanent structure, had administration. It had the operating rooms, the X-ray department, recovery rooms, and these ancillary services. The patients, both medical and surgical, were housed in what called Srifim, in Nissen huts. Nissen huts. That's they're a kind of a curved metal roof, and they were long huts with beds on either side. Maybe I think there were perhaps 30 beds in length, 30 on either side of the corridor. And there was, of course, room for the head nurse and the nurses and the thing. And there were a series of these these huts, which was where the patients were kept. If they needed surgery, they were then wheeled. It was just around the corner from the main hospital. They were wheeled on stretchers to the main hospital, where for X-rays or for surgery, and after recovery room, then they would be taken back to the beds. This was not unlike some of the hospitals that are built in England, that were sort of not the old traditional hospital, except in England, of course, the buildings would be in bricks and mortar. They were solid, not Srifim, not shacks. And we began working and operating, and I, as I say, was not experienced. I was just graduated from medical school and from internship, but I very much enjoyed the kind of surgery we're doing.
You did?
Yeah, in Haifa. Of course, as a very junior, I wasn't doing and taking too much responsibility, but I was enjoying it and interested. And I worked in a hospital. I don't remember how long, but it was probably a matter of weeks or maybe a month when the fighting broke out again.
Okay, let's get to that in a sec. Hold on. So you would say that from when you got to Israel, you had like a month that things were still calm.
Oh yes.
There was the truce was still in effect.
The truth,
So you had time to assimilate,
yeah,
to get to know people.
yeah.
Like you said, from what you explained to me, most of the doctors here are Machal people in this hospital.
In this hospital, yes.
In this specific hospital.
Either Machal or Gachal. Gachal were the refugees. Machal were volunteers. Gachal were people from Europe who had escaped Europe, who were DPs.
Sure.
And my recollection is that most of the doctors were well, some of them had probably been born in Israel, but most of them were from outside.
Outside. And before we get to the fighting breaking back out again, what happened to your friend that you left with? Where's he?
He was assigned to a unit. I kept in touch with him. He met a sabra, a girl, who actually was, it's interesting, her father was a well-known poet and had won an Israeli prize, it was the first time at that time. He wrote the words for one of the songs from Yerushalayim, I think, Kinneret, I come up. Anyway, he married her, and I was the best man at the wedding. At that time, there was an army social place on Yarkon Street.
We're about the Machal Club.
I don't think it may have been a club. I know on Yarkon there was a place where you could.
Where all the Machal people could meet.
You could meet, yes.
We're going to talk about that. Yeah.
And he was actually married in that club.
We'll talk.
Now, I was in Haifa, of course, so I didn't have much to do with it, but I remember going to Machal and to Yarkon Street too, and to being at his wedding. He had another interesting story, but it's not my story.
Yeah, but he was attached to a unit or something?
He was a doctor with a unit.
Okay.
He was the same state as me, a young doctor, just graduated, and he was assigned to a unit.
Okay. What can you tell me about this month your first month in Israel? You're in the hospital.
I'm enjoying it.
You're in Haifa.
I'm enjoying it tremendously. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
I say there were a bunch of young Jewish, mostly South African, but not exclusively South African people who were. They knew each other from South Africa largely, so they were a kind of close bunch. But for me it was very pleasant. It was, I say, it was exciting because I was doing stuff that I'd never done before, and very pleasant, compatible groups. It wasn't work to me, it was pleasure. That's really
okay.
That's how.
Yeah. And of course, you get to see a little bit of Haifa.
A little bit of Haifa.
Sure.
I didn't travel much because I didn't have the means. But I saw Haifa. I'm trying to remember where there was whether we had any family. I don't think I knew anyone in Haifa. I met Marilyn there. She was one of the nurses. Now I was on the surgical team, and so that I was responsible in the surgical ward. Meantime, there were medical wards with girls, with nurses including Marilyn and others from Machal and from elsewhere. I met and knew one of the medical physicians, particularly one of the senior physicians, was a Dr. Lehman, Lehman. The name sounds German, but I don't know whether he was born in Israel. But that's one name that sticks out in my mind, who was a very pleasant and very competent medical doctor. That's really in
Okay, so about a month after you arrive in hospital number 10 in Haifa, the truce is broken.
Yes.
And the fighting continues now. Just to freshen your memory, just to put things in perspective historically, after the truce, Israel is much more well equipped. We get the weapons from Czechoslovakia.
Yes.
Things are a little bit more in order, but the pressure from Egypt and Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and Jordan, of course, is a little bit more intense. But tell me about, if you can remember, understanding that the truce is over.
Actually, what happened? I'm working in the hospital, and then I get a call. I'm being sent somewhere. I don't know where, and I don't know why. All I know is I got orders to pack up. You're being sent somewhere, and where am I being sent? I find myself with an army unit. I'm not a medical thing, just an army unit. So I'm now an army doctor with the soldiers in a small village called Chulata. Chulata. That's near Lake Chula. Lake Chula, of course, was at that time was a lake.
Yeah.
There was Lake Chula, and then there was Kinneret and the Dead Sea. There were 3 lakes.
So you're sent with an army unit.
Nobody tells you why
Absolutely.
or what's going on, but we're there.
So tell me.
In fact, it turned out that my unit was basically facing the Syrians on the east, towards the east. Meanwhile, the truce breaks down and there's fighting in Western Galilee. By this time, there's an Arab force under Kawuji, the Arab irregulars they were called. They weren't from they were from mainly Lebanon, and there's an action for a few days, and then Kawuji is sent. They reconquer the Western Galilee. I remember Sassa was a town on the way between where we were and Akka. We were more or less in line with Akka. And my recollection, to get from where we were in Chulata to Haifa involved going down to almost to Tiberias and then across the mountains. When Kawuji was expelled from Western Galilee, then the road from where we were, went directly west to Akka and Haifa. And what my recollection was the celebration, not that Kaoji was out, but that now we could get back to Haifa. It was a shorter road. It was easier to get there. That was kind of silly. After the fighting died down, then the army unit, Chulata was a temporary place. Just
okay, so how long? Let me put it this way: you were with an infantry unit, probably. It was an infantry unit.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, and it was probably. Could it be that you were a part of an operation that was called Mivtza Chiram? Does that ring a bell?
No, I didn't.
It doesn't ring a bell. It was the operation of the Palmach and the army to liberate the Galilee. Sasa and Chulata.
Yes.
And
yeah, but it didn't last. It was only a few days.
Yeah.
It was only a few days.
I think.
Yes.
I think. But I want to ask you a personal. Hold on. I want to ask you, when you're told in the hospital that you're going into the field with these soldiers, you're going into combat. You're going to cease.
They didn't tell me anything.
I understand. Yeah, they didn't tell you. So when you realize that you're going to be, what do you see there? What kind of situations do you deal with as a doctor in the field?
I didn't have anything special to do. I mean, while in Chulata, I don't think I even had a mapaya, a clinic, because it was in the forward position.
Did you treat any wounded people?
There were no. Our unit wasn't involved in any fighting. We were facing the Syrians.
Okay.
In case they would interfere, but they never did. So we were just sitting there.
Okay.
We were just sitting there. The fighting was going on to the west.
Okay, and you guys were there
we were just there in case.
Okay.
Not knowing what's going on. Nobody tells you anything.
Okay, so basically.
But after a few days after the fighting is over, the unit moves to Rosh Pina, which is a permanent military establishment.
And that's where you go with them to.
Now I'm the doctor of the unit in Rosh Pina. Now this is a real
this is it.
Army.
Okay, so Rosh Pina. Do you remember the name of the Machane or it was just Rosh Pina?
Well, Rosh Pina was the town, and the camp was just off the main road going north and south. It was there. I think there's still an army unit there.
Okay. So you get to Rosh Pina.
I get to Rosh Pina, and I just have an ordinary Mapia.
Mirpa. You're the head of the Mirpa, is that correct?
I'm the only doctor. I don't have any serious problems. I mean, the soldiers come with whatever complaints if they got a headache or something. I probably give out pills. I don't do anything very exciting. Incidentally, for the first time, I'm now in a Hebrew-speaking environment.
Okay, tell me about that.
In Haifa, in the hospital, everybody speaks English.
Yeah.
But in the unit in Rosh Pina, a few people have some English, but basically I'm in a Hebrew-speaking environment, and in the course of a few weeks, my Hebrew improves immensely. The Hebrew I have now is probably what I still remember from those few weeks.
So you were forced to learn the language, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how long I was there. I suppose it was a few weeks or a month. It was I'm trying to think even the season of the year. Certainly it was in the winter, because in the mornings when I would go from my room where I slept to breakfast in the mess hall, and walking there, I could see Mount Hermon in the distance. From Vaadi you get a lovely view of Mount Hermon with a snow cap, and it's a beautiful sight. And I said to myself, I can understand why people would worship a place like that. It was just lovely. It was pleasant. I didn't have any excitement, nothing really unusual, but I did whatever I had to do as an army doctor. Then I'm sent back to Haifa, to the hospital. So that why I was there or why I was sent back, nobody told you anything. You just give me the orders. And I'm back in Haifa, back to the hospital and working with the friends that I had before. And we have a really quite pleasant. This was a time of rationing, so the food wasn't particularly good. I think occasionally we were able to buy some chocolates or something, but it was nobody minded, because this was a war, and it was. You accepted it. So I was friendly and enjoyed what I was doing. I don't have any special recollections of anything unusual or exciting. I can remember particularly a couple of the patients that we were looking after. One was a young Sephardi soldier who was Hakim Hanania was his name, Hakim Hanania. He'd been responsible for capturing a tank in the fighting previously. He jumped on the tank and thrown in a big grenade, he was unsophisticated. He was, I wouldn't say wild, but he was, he broke his back, and that's where we looked after him. At that time, there was surgery for the backs, and one of the means of treatment was the patient had to be on a plaster bed. Really, they made a plaster cast, plaster Paris, for his front, and then turned over in the back so that he could be almost encased in this plaster. This was the technique they had. It's no longer relevant, but that's what they did. And then to turn him over, of course, he'd been laying either on his back or on his face on one of these plaster things. You'd cover him with the other half, and you could turn him over. The idea is so he wouldn't be moving and wouldn't displace the repair of the fractured spine.
Yeah.
I remember, of course, when we were face down, there had to be an opening for his face and for him to feed, and another opening down below for him to pee.
Yeah.
And I remember somebody, probably one of the nurses, knitted a little cap to keep his penis warm.
Okay.
Anyway, why am I telling you about this? One night, Hakim Kananya climbed out of his
Cast.
Because he's uncomfortably walking, and I remember the one of the South African doctors saying, "This guy, he's an animal." Anyway, he was all right.
He was all right. His
Yeah.
name was Hakim.
Hakim Hanania.
Hakim.
Hanania.
I will.
I'm trying to remember a couple of the patients that we looked at. There was a young woman, a girl. She was probably in her 20s. I think she had been in the army, but we did have some patients that weren't necessarily in the army. She had pain in her hip. At that time, there was not certain what was the cause. They thought she had an infection or something. What I'm interested, why I remember her is because I remember the X-rays that showed a little erosion in the femur, in the hip bone. And the question was whether to operate on it or not to operate. I don't think we ever operated on her because we were afraid that if this was an infection, it would spread and cause more damage.
Okay.
Subsequently, in my training in America in orthopedics, I realized that what she had was another thing which had not been recognized at that time. But it was a condition called osteoma, which is not an infection. And really, the treatment, she didn't probably get the treatment then that perhaps would have been given her later. That one I remember, 'cause she was a sweet young girl who had a lot of pain.
Did you guys have any soldiers coming in from the front that you remember?
No. Hakim Kanani was from the front.
There was a big battle. There was big battles in Tzfat also. There was some.
Yeah, but I'm sure we had routine stuff, but they don't stick in my mind.
Okay.
One that does stick, one more that sticks in mind, there were two young women Americans who were teachers who were living in Ein HaShofet.
Ein HaShofet.
Ein HaShofet is a kibbutz in the Emek Israel. And one of these two girls had an ankle injury, I think, whether it was a bullet wound. That's the front door.
I'll get it.
Come in.
Oh, thank you.
Just hang it on.
This?
Hang it on the
On
doorknob.
the door?
Thank you.
No problem.
So she came in because she needed surgery, and we looked after her. The thing about her was that you may recall that Arthur Koestler, who was an author, who he was quite controversial at the time. He's dead now, but he wrote about Israel. I can't remember the title of the book. He stayed in Ein HaShofet and got a background for the book while he was living there. He subsequently published the book and wanted to dedicate it to the kibbutz of Ein HaShofet. And I guess what he wrote didn't satisfy the kibbutznik. They didn't like his politics. He was originally was communist, and then he turned the other way. Anyway, they turned down they didn't want the dedication. But these are the things that I recall from my time. I'm working in a routine way, very pleasant, and then I get sent away again.
Okay, hold on.
Is that how it goes?
Hold on, let me just turn this off. Okay. Okay.
This time I'm being sent south. I'm going to a unit which covers from Beersheba to Eilat. There's one unit, and the headquarter brigade is in a place called Vaadi, Jirafi. Which is Vaadi, Jirafi.
Vaadi.
Jirafi.
Okay.
It's in the southern Negev. It's in the desert with little hills and mountains all around. There are no real roads. There are passages, but you need a four-wheel drive to go anywhere.
So so again, the hospital, somebody, your captain in the hospital tells you.
Somebody tells you you're going. Nobody tells you why or where, but you find out where you are.
Down there.
And I'm sent down to Vaadi Jirafi.
Okay.
And there I'm also working as an army doctor and looking after routine things. And from Vaadi Jirafi, one time I have to go down to Eilat. Eilat at that time, of course, was in Israeli hands. This is after it had been liberated, after it had been conquered, I should say. Eilat, there's an old Turkish fort near the shore called Rashrash. And that's just sort of an open square with mud brick one-story buildings around. I guess a typical Turkish fort. No soldiers are in the fort. The soldiers are all in tents in the hills behind you, nothing to be seen. There are two wooden shacks on the shore for the fishermen, originally for the fishermen, but one of them turned out to be my clinic, and the back half is my bed, and it's where I'm sleeping.
So wait a minute, I just to get things so that I understand. You're sent from Haifa to Vaadi Jirafi.
Jirafi. Yes.
How long do you spend in Vaadi Jirafi?
I'm altogether in Haifa, I don't know, a month.
In Jirafi.
Well, I'm in Jirafi or Eilat. I'm down there perhaps a month or two, I don't know.
And that's near Rashrash. It's
Rashrash is the name of the fort on the shores of Eilat.
Exactly. So
I'm responsible for this army unit, which is, say, all the way from Beersheba to Eilat.
So you're in charge of the army unit from Vaadi Jirafi to Rashrash. Is that correct?
And for that matter, there were some units further up to Beersheba. This battalion, I can't remember the thing, the battalion is responsible from, the headquarters brigade is in Vaadi Jirafi.
Okay.
One of the other brigades is in Eilat. Another brigade is spread out to Beersheba. But I'm basically staying either in Vaadi Jirafi or in Eilat.
Okay, but where is Vaadi Jirafi located geographically?
It's maybe a third of the way between Eilat and Beersheba,
Okay.
in the mountains.
Okay.
I remember I really loved the
Nature?
yeah, the nature. I used to go for walks in the mountain, in the hills there, and it's a stark kind of scenery. It's not lush, it's not pastoral, but it had its own beauty, and I very much enjoyed the scenery, the negative. I was there in the summertime, so it was hot, but there was no rain. But there was a shower set up somewhere, and from the water from the shower would trickle down into the ground. And along that, where the water trickled, there were plants growing. I remember there was green. The only green in the whole location was where the water from the shower drained off. And so I very much enjoyed it, and
so you were stationed in Vaadi Jirafi. You had a little mirpa'ah there.
yes,
You also had a little mirpa'ah in Umm el-Rashrash.
in Eilat.
In Eilat.
Yes.
Can you tell me about Eilat?
Eilat, as I say, there was a stony beach. It was a stony beach. There was a landing strip, an airfield, in the same location where the airfield is now. Of course, it was much smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And it consisted really only of a landing strip. There were no lights. There were no buildings, but and the only planes that used it were Piper Cubs, which were a two-seater plane, pilot and one other person. I was in Eilat though for an occasion. I guess probably I was sent down because of the thing. Ben Gurion was coming down to Eilat on an inspection tour.
Okay.
And everybody, all the soldiers from around who could do, wanted to be there. And I went, I was there. And I saw Ben Gurion, met him. I had a photograph taken
Really?
of me with Ben Gurion and one of the guys, either an ambulance driver or something, in the Shin race. I had that photograph. Coincidentally, another extraordinary coincidence. This is an aside. When I came to Ahuzabad, where I'm living now, one of the salespersons was a girl. She's still here, and one of the things they did, this was a few years ago, was all the residents, all the Dairim, wrote a short, brief account of who they were, where they came from, and so on, and to submit a photograph. So I wrote this thing, and it was a small magazine with each page a different person. And this photograph was published. When Sippy, who was the salesperson, saw the photograph of me when Ben Gurion and another person said, "That's my father." He died. He wasn't, by that time he had died. But
Her father was?
her father was presumably the ambulance driver.
Do you have that
Another
picture?
coincidence. I think I still have it. I gave it to them, but I might still have it. I can
You don't
look
have the
for
picture
it.
anymore of you and Ben
I
Graham?
may have it. I may have it. It's, I can look later on. I'll look, see if
Yes.
if you want it, you can copy it or have it.
I would love to take a picture of it.
It's not a very good. It's a small black and white,
I
but
understand.
what it is, that's what it is. Now,
So Ben Gurion comes to Eilat.
yes,
Um,
and he's being turned around. Soldiers are coming from all over, and one truck with a bunch of soldiers on the back is driving down to Eilat when it misses the road and rolls over. And there's a bunch of casualties. Nobody's killed, but some of them were injured. And I'm the doctor, the only one for miles around, faced with all these casualties.
where was it exactly? Do you remember? Was it on the way down to Eilat?
Yes.
These were soldiers who were coming.
We're coming to Eilat.
For the Ben Gurion visit.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
I've got busy times now. Firstly, sorting out. There were ambulances, but to get from Eilat to Beersheba, which was the nearest real hospital, was a 10-hour trip. And an ambulance with a 4-wheel drive, because the road through the Arava is not a road. Sometimes it's just sand and sometimes
So
there's
when
rocks.
you hear about this accident, where are you when you hear about
I'm in
it?
Eilat, and
You're in Eilat.
they're bringing in the casualties
They're bringing the casualties to Eilat.
to Eilat,
Okay.
which
Continue.
and we have a couple of ambulances that can take the most seriously injured people. Take them. This is now late afternoon. There's time for 2 Piper Cubs to come and land and take off. There's no lights, so once it's dark, that we can't use the airport. So I sort out the most seriously wounded, those that can go in the ambulance and send them off. One guy had a bad shoulder injury. I want to put him in a Piper Cub, but he can't fit in because of his arm, and I have to manipulate his shoulder, probably fractured, and he goes off to Eilat. I'm busy to Beersheba, and I'm busy sewing up cuts and bruises and looking after as many as whatever I could do. And I thought by evening things are under control. And the next day, another doctor is of course able to come down and help to look after things.
Do you have any nurses helping you?
I had, I think, only male. There were no women, male ambulance medics. Yes.
You're the only doctor, but you're not alone.
I'm not alone. I've got
a few medics with you.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next day, another doctor
Doctor
arrives?
comes down, and then by then you can get more. The more people can be shipped out to Beersheba, and it settles down. I remember late in the evening late at night when everything was really settled. I remember swimming in the sea. I'm right by the sea, and just to relax and so on, and relieved that things were under control. And one of the soldiers the next day says to me, he sees that the Tzva Hagana Israel looks after its wounded, and that to me was a great compliment. That he felt that we handled it and looked after people reasonably well.
Hold on a second. I want you to not forget. Okay.
One of the nurses in Haifa, in working in the hospital that I'm interested in, is a girl named Marilyn Petranka.
Okay.
She's an American, and for some reason I'm attracted to her. And when I'm in Eilat, I send her a letter telling her about my experience in Eilat. This was in the middle of summer, and I tell her that I'm busy washing my shirts out in the sea, and that I can have 3 shirts, and I wash it and hang it up carefully on the barbed wire, then do the second, and I hang it up, and I do the third, and I hang it up, and by that time the first shirt is dry because of the hot wind. And I described this to her amongst other things. I don't remember what else I wrote. Altogether in Latin, Vaadi, Jirafi, I don't know how long, maybe a month or maybe longer.
But by this time the war is over, is that correct?
Yes. Now there's, no more war.
It's over, so it's probably around March 1949?
Later, because it was summertime.
It was summertime.
Yeah, by this time...
What do you remember, let me ask you, so what happens after Eilat?
I'm sent back to Haifa.
Okay.
Again, why? No, just I'm told you're going back, and I go back to Haifa and resume what we were doing before in the hospital. Sometime around this time, Marilyn asked me if I'd like to go to a concert. She had a friend who had a couple of tickets to the concert. The concert was the Israel Philharmonic. It was the first series tour of the Israel Philharmonic. It had been the Palestine Philharmonic Orchestra. The special concert with Leonard Bernstein is conducting, and he's taking him around. And the girl who had the tickets told Marilyn for some reason she couldn't use it. Could she use the other ticket? So Marilyn asked me if I'd like to go to the concert. Of course, I'd love to go to the concert. And I go to the concert with Bernstein. I had the program. I still had the program until I gave it to one of the lecturers here who was particularly interested in Leonard Bernstein, the original program. So I began to spend some time with Marilyn.
Yeah.
Marilyn going home for Rosh Hashanah. This is August, September, and. Before she goes, we decide we're going to be engaged. We plan to get engaged and get married. She's going back home. I'm still in the army. Now we're around September. Marilyn's going to leave. I don't have any special plans, but now I'm engaged to Marilyn, so I'm going to America to get married. And and the war's over, so I decided I'm leaving the army. I don't need to be in the army anymore.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. Exactly. Before the war is over, do you remember the first elections in Israel? Do you remember when they were held? No. Do you remember the war being declared over and kind of like?
No. I don't remember any particular celebration, nothing like a V Day or VJ.
No, you don't remember anything like that.
They'd been fighting truth, and I guess nobody knew whether there was going to be more fighting, so we didn't know if the war was over. But eventually there was an armistice declared with the United Nations. It was clear it was over. I'm sure we were excited and happy, but I don't remember any particular celebration.
Now I want to talk to you a little bit about a different topic, and what I want to talk to you about is the Mahal, the volunteers that came. Now, you mentioned, and this is what I want to pick at your brain and try and see what we can remember. There was a club in Tel Aviv.
Yes.
Which was I believe it was where the Air Force headquarters was, and inside of it there was a Mahal club.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to that Mahal club? Did you have any contact with Mahal people? Can you elaborate a little bit on this place in Tel Aviv, and if you've ever been there, and what can you tell me about it?
My only recollection of being there, I remember it was a Yarkon, and there was a place there, and I had told you about Harry being married, so I was there for the wedding. But I never stayed in Tel Aviv, so I really had very little to do with it. I was the only other time I was in Tel Aviv that I recall was when I was going, just visiting friends in Tel Letvinsky, that was then hospital. Mm-hmm. That's another story, but which I'll come to. But really, in terms of organization, Mahal, no. I don't remember there was anything. I was going to leave, well, I'm still in the army. One time I'm visiting friends in Tel Letvinsky, and I'm walking through the ward. And suddenly there's a big guy in one of the beds, sees me, and he yells out, "Shalom, Dr. Sober." I look at him and says, I don't know at all. I says, "Ani makeh otcha." Where do I know you from? He says, "From Benghazi. My twin brother is in the British Army in Benghazi. This guy had somehow fallen off a roof or something, had been injured, and my twin brother had looked after him. And he'd come to Israel, he sees me, and we were very much alike at that time. He thought I was my twin brother."
Now, what was this guy doing in Benghazi?
He'd just been injured there. He lived there. That was his home. He came from there.
He was
he was a Libyan. He was a Jew.
Okay.
And who'd been injured, and I guess the British Army looked after civilians too. And so that was another astonishing coincidence.
Now,
it happened all the while.
Tell me, your brother who's in the British Army, are you in any sort of correspondence with him while you're in Israel?
No direct correspondence, but we could only via England. But as I indicated, we're not particularly communicating.
The two of you?
The two of or any in the family. I'm sure I write letters from time to time, about this, but he's in the British Army, and I guess he's discharged eventually while I'm still in Israel.
Yeah. So you decide to
I'm going to leave the army after about a year in September because there's no more casualties, and I guess, I don't know, I guess I thought I had to do something with my life.
Okay, hold on. Okay, so you decide. So you're like you've been in Israel for like a year.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So continue. So you decide that
I leave the army, and
no
then
problem leaving the army. Like
just because as I say, there was no fighting. Everything was quiet. There was center, there was rationing, and this was the hardest time. After the war, during the war, everything goes. But after the war, then you start complaining and belly aching and whatever. I leave the number 10 military hospital and start working at the Rambam hospital, which is in Haifa, which is the main civilian hospital. And looking back, I'm astonished at my what's the word? My cheek, the nerve. What am I going to be in Rambam? I'm going to be an anesthetist.
What's that?
An anesthetic, giving the anesthetic. I've had a minimal of experience of that in medical school. Of course, I've been operating in number 10 hospital, but I'm not the anesthetist. But I know a little about how to give anesthetics, and I'm going to be the anesthetist in Rambam Hospital. We had very limited equipment at that time. There was ether, of course, and there was injectable anesthetics and oxygen, but no nitrous oxide, which is usually at that time induced anesthesia. And I work in Rambam as an anesthetist, and I think I do a pretty good job. I say I don't remember any particular incidents or things, but I'm working there for about 6 months, until March, when I'm going to America to get married. We're writing each other, Marilyn's there. Before that, Marilyn's brother comes to visit Israel, and she introduces him to me. At that time, I happen to be working with plaster cast, so I'm wearing a oilskin apron because it's messy. I got shorts on, so I've got this long thing with shorts, and she walks in with her brother, and he sees me and says, "This is what you're going to marry?" He goes home and tells his mother and her mother all kinds of stories about me, that I'm this and that, and then finally he says he has a hoika with a hump, and this, he says, she doesn't believe, he's really just making it up. Anyway, that was what she heard from him about me. So I worked for about 6 months in March.
In Rambam.
In Rambam.
And you remember the tzena, the rationing period after the war?
Yeah.
It was tough, huh? It was tough time.
Yeah, that was, there were difficulties, and people were complaining, and you couldn't say there's a war on. We were never hungry, but we didn't have any luxuries.
But things were also rationed in England after the war.
Yes. Well, I mean, you're dealing with a Jewish state, so... And then I'm going to America. I don't want to go back to England because I've evaded the draft. I should have been in the British Army. I was not there, so theoretically at least, I could be charged with, not with desertion, I guess, but with something. I don't want to go to England. I want to take that chance. So I go to Paris. My mother comes to Paris just to see me till I could see her, and then I sailed to America on the Queen Mary. Incidentally, Harry Spira, who'd also leave the army and wants to specialize in obstetrics and gynecology, does go back to England. He's interviewed and investigated, and after some time he's told, all right, you can now apply for a job training in obstetrics, which he did, and he graduated. Incidentally, that his chief, whom he abandoned in 1948, who he left, where in 1948, when we went to Israel, we mailed letters to
your bosses.
So when Harry went back to England, he of course sees gets in contact with his former chief, and he's very understanding, very cooperative, and arranges for Harry to get a job and to get his training he wants. Another coincidence, I didn't realize how many were, I had, of course, written to my chief in surgery when I left England. One time I'm in Beersheba, not in Beersheba, in Tiberia, and I'm walking along the street in Tiberia, and I see my former chief in Tiberia walking.
Your chief from London?
From England, yes.
From England? Your boss?
My
the
boss.
One that you sent the letter to?
The one I sent the letter to. Turns out he is a member of what's called the Scottish Rite. Where the Scottish Rite is some kind of religious organization, and the Scottish Rite had a hospital in Tiberias. The hospital in Tiberias, and it's still there, was originally, it's some kind of a Christian messianic or thing, and they did look at hospitals and looking after people. He's visiting this Scottish Rite hospital in Tiberias when I meet him. Of course, we greet each other. He's very understanding. Of course, he's pro-Israel anyway, because of all of this. But another extraordinary coincidence that we should meet at that time.
And you met him
just in the street. I'm walking along and I see him. What are you doing here? And he tells me he's a member of Scottish Rite and he's visiting the hospital. So I finish up in Rambam and I fly to Paris and meet my mother, and then go to Cherbourg and get on the Queen Mary, 5 days to New York.
We'll get to that in a sec, but when you leave Israel, are you a citizen? What are you? Status?
No, I'm still, I've got a British passport. I don't have an Israeli passport. I'm a British citizen. I loved Israel. I would have been quite prepared to stay in Israel at that time mentally, except I wanted to specialize and I wanted to get married.
Right.
So I didn't leave in any way bitterly. I left really having really had a wonderful experience and appreciated it.
Because there's a lot of Machal people who did leave bitterly. Do you know this?
Yeah, I guess. I didn't have much contact with other people, though. I was just in my work. No, I guess some, but I'm relatively tolerant. I think I'm fairly easygoing, and certainly there were frustrations. Anybody who's in Israel in any bureaucratic situation has a lot of frustrations.
Yeah,
but I never felt bitter about it.
A lot of the Machal people that I spoke to felt bitter because they didn't feel that they were given full recognition of their part in the 1948 war.
I think that's much later.
Yes. But I'm just saying.
Yeah, but I was looking.
It's something that comes up in the interviews that I do with the last gentleman that I spoke to. Who I won't mention his name, but he said, "Listen, we had everybody. There's for example, there's a lot of monuments in this country for units and this. Nothing for Machal.
At that time, there was nothing.
Nothing, and they
felt they weren't recognized.
Right, and they had to pay for it themselves. Of course, the government didn't pay for it. Like there was a whole story, and the gentleman that I spoke to said to me that he thought that was very,
insensitive.
Yeah, very insensitive. I mean, I don't know the exact number, but there was a lot of Machal people that did die. Again, these are people that like you who volunteered to come here. I know people who were, but that's good that you don't. No, absolutely. I wanted to ask you how you relate to that. Another interesting question that I want to ask you, which, while you're in Israel, what's happening to your beliefs and ideology about communism?
I'm only a year out of England.
Sure.
I'm still very left wing. I love the kibbutz, the idea of the kibbutz. I never stayed on a kibbutz, but the idea, the theory or the notion of the kibbutz I think very attractive, and I feel if I weren't going to America, I could easily see myself living in a kibbutz. I'm not religious at all. I'm, if anything, anti-religious. I'm anti-clerical. Well, that's the situation.
But you never even stepped foot on a kibbutz.
I remember my older brother came to visit one Pesach, and I told you about the girls from Ein HaShofet. I go to Ein HaShofet for Pesach. Ein HaShofet, of course, is a secular kibbutz.
Very secular. It's one of the first ones, too.
Right.
It's old school.
And of course, the Pesach to them is a spring festival.
Yeah.
But I go with my brother when I'm there for the Seder night. I think that's the only kind of religious contact I have in Israel all the time I'm there.
Because Israel at this point is starting off to be a very socialist state.
Yeah,
the Soviet Union even backs it.
Yeah.
They think they can manipulate everything. But when you talk about left wing, you mean socially left wing. You don't mean politically left wing.
But
when you say you're left wing politically, it means that
with the Arabs.
Yeah.
Well,
this is at this time, not
now.
Yes.
At that time, I don't think we'd won the war, and we had to do what we had to build. I don't remember really any consideration. The Arabs had fled, and we were where we were, and I wasn't particularly politically active or interested.
Yeah. No. Okay.
And
I'm just interested because when you're in England, you're very excited about socialism and kibbutz, but actually when you get to Israel, you don't even have time to really dive into it or research it or
No.
explore it.
No, it's really intellectual. My thing is essentially intellectual rather than social. I think theoretically it's an ideal society. So America, I come to America and I meet Marilyn's mother.
Okay.
And her family.
And where does their family live?
In Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn, I know.
In Brooklyn.
And
her mother is divorced, though her father is not around. I've never met her father.
Okay.
Her sister had already married at that time, was living separately. So I met her, but I didn't particularly know her. But I knew Leo. I'd seen him in Israel, and I met him. Meantime, I'm interested in becoming an orthopedic surgeon. I'm a doctor. I'm on a student visa to America, and I get an appointment in Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, where Marilyn is a nurse, where she graduated from, and I start working in the pathology department of Brooklyn Jewish Hospital to be the beginning of my specialist training. And that's what I'm doing. I'm there for actually a year and a half in Brooklyn. No, 2.5 years. I have a year and a half of pathology, and then a year as a junior, as an intern in orthopedics, in adult orthopedics.
Okay. And when do you get married? What year?
Oh, I got married in May. I got to America in March, and we're married in May.
Of 1950?
1950. We're living in Brooklyn in my mother-in-law's apartment. We have a room in Brooklyn Jewish for the residents, the interns. They have resident quarters, and I have a room. It's meant for 2 people, and in our case, it's Marilyn and I. They had 1 floor for men and 1 floor for women. But in this case, she was the only woman on the men's floor because she was married. So if she wanted to go to the bathroom, she either had to go down 2 floors to the women's, or I had to stand guard at the bathroom.
And this is...
We lived there. We got $15 a month was the salary. It didn't go very far. Because we had a room and we had food in the hospital, and that's the way we lived. Marilyn was working, and she was earning some money as a nurse. I was earning pipkas. We actually were going to go on strike, and finally we got raised to $25 a month. Anyway, meantime, I've got to get a program for training in orthopedics. I apply, and I have actually 2 particular acceptances. One is in Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, very prestigious hospital. Mass General Hospital.
Yeah.
And another one in the south, and I have to decide which one I want to go to, and I decided I'm going to go to Boston. I go there for the interview, for the application for a job as a resident in orthopedics to do more training. I fly to Boston and then took a cab to Mass General Hospital. Do you know Boston at all?
A little. I've only been there once.
Well, Mass General Hospital is just at the Charles River Basin. The Charles River is dammed so that there's a little lake, and then just the other side of the dam is Mass General Hospital. I'm driving from the airport in a cab, and we come up to the Charles River Basin. There's the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, across the lake. There's sailboats and rowboats on the lake, and it's an idyllic, beautiful scene. And this is in the fall, and the sunset just over MIT, a red sun, lovely. I have the interview, go back, and I told Madeline, Boston is beautiful. We've got to be there. My job starts January the 1st. And we take the train up at the end of December, and it's cold and it's snowing. We land in South Street railway station. We're not flying, we're in train. And we take the taxi from there to Mass General Hospital. That goes through the worst slums and the Scully Square, as it was then, which is the red light district. And Marin says, this is the beautiful city you want to go to. It's all been demolished now. It's now all federal buildings. How many
years did you spend in Boston?
1 year.
Okay.
In Boston, I'm working in it's very good, very good. I'm learning and so on. And I want to go, now I have to do children's orthopedics for a year. So I have to apply for some different hospital. Meanwhile, I'm in Boston, and I get a call from the FBI. Oh, I'd been on a student visa, and I'm married now, and I apply for a residence visa. I get a call from the FBI. They want to interview me. What's the matter? What's the matter? You're a communist. Of course, I'm not a communist.
Oh my God.
This is McCarthy time.
Hold on. Oh my God.
This is McCarthy. You know what I'm talking about.
Of course I know what you're talking about.
Anyway,
so they call you.
Somebody I told you when I joined the Communist Party in medical school, there were maybe 4 or 5 fellow students in the group. I had no idea which one of them was the spy for working for British intelligence, but obviously one of them told whoever. I have no idea who. At any rate, they call me in. They have interviews, and of course I admit I was a communist. What can I do about it? One of my teachers in Brooklyn Jewish in orthopedics.
Where, in Brooklyn?
In Brooklyn, where I would done pathology and some orthopedics. We get on very well together, and it's clear that he would be very happy to have me as a partner when I finally got my
what did the FBI
things.
tell you? I mean, what do they...
Well, I have to write to him. I need to get notices from people testifying that I'm that I'm no longer a communist. I write to him, and of course, at that time with McCarthy, anybody with associated with a communist was a communist. He backed me up, of course, but it was bothersome. What can I do? So he says, well, you can write something to indicate you're giving up the communist philosophy. And I'm not sure how or what to do that. Or you can go in the American Army. So I'm surprised. Can the army draft the British? I'm still a British subject. I called the British embassy. Can the Americans draft me as a British subject? He said, yes. If you don't like it, you go back to England. I have a physical for the British Army, for the American Army. I have to go for a physical. And here again, I'm being drafted to a war. This was the Vietnam War.
No, Korea.
No, the Korean War.
Korea.
Which was a police action. It was technically, they'd say it wasn't a war.
Huh?
Truman at that time, if it's a war, then they have to give pensions and all kinds of things. So originally, Truman said it's a police action, not a war. That's politics. Anyway,
so you go into the American Army?
I'm subject to draft in the American Army.
And this is just to clear your name as a communist?
Yes, to give me so that I can get a green card.
Right.
So I'm looking for a job in children's orthopedics, and I'm no longer looking in America. I'm looking in Canada, and I get a job in the Shriners Hospital in Montreal. The Shriners Hospital. The Shriners are a social organization that sponsor hospitals and things, particularly for crippled children. They have there's a hospital dotted around in America and Canada. And I'm accepted there. Now this is ideal in that I'm in Canada, which is fine. I'm out of the clutches of the American Army. And we go to Montreal.
So you guys run away from the States, basically?
Yes. We run away from the
Beautiful
States.
city, Montreal.
Very nice. Cold in the winter.
Yes. It's
very
beautiful.
cold.
Yes, but it's a beautiful city.
Yeah.
Good food.
And I'm working in before I leave Israel, one other thing.
Yeah.
I have altogether about $300. That's all I have, either from what I had from England or from what I earned. I don't know how, but I had $300. At that time, and this would be probably beginning of 1950, you could buy a plot of land in Achuza, which at that time was a little bit out of Haifa, you know, Achuza in Mount Carmel, for $300. So I'm thinking, should I buy a plot of land? But how can I'm going to America to get married? I can't go there with nothing in my pocket. And so I can't. So I'm not going to buy any. I go to Israel, and we have the $300. Marilyn's working as a nurse and earning some money, and that's how we live. Now we're in Montreal, and in Montreal we're given the one of Marilyn's friends, a nurse, has her husband is Israeli, and he knows a young couple in Montreal, an Israeli couple, and gives us their name and address to contact when we're there. That's the name is Vered. He's Vered. She is actually Sarah. She is a member of. She is from the family of. They make cereals and things here. Anyway, we get in touch with them. I have in Boston. I buy a 13-year-old car, which was
1937.
But it goes, and I paint it myself, and it's always breaking down. And I keep a log of how much I spend on routine things, for gas and oil, and routine inspections, and how much I spend on repairs. And the two match exactly. Whatever I spend to ride the car, anyway, I've got a car. Sarah and the Vereds don't have a car. And who else do we meet? We're in Montreal. We get a letter that's been sent to Brooklyn and forwarded to us. The letter is from Ethel Kurland, the nurse that I met in England in the emergency department, and who I met in Haifa. She was a nurse in Haifa, the English girl, and she had, before I left Israel, she and another bunch, mostly of South Africans, had started a moshav south of Haifa on the coast, which was Habonim, moshav. It wasn't a kibbutz, it was moshav Habonim, there on the coast there, and she moved there. Subsequently, she met and married somebody in there, and they moved to Montreal. She's writing to me in Brooklyn. She knows I've gone to Brooklyn to marry Marilyn, and the letter is forwarded to me in Montreal. I get the letter, the winter time, and it's snowing, and she's describing in the letter how much snow they have in Montreal, and about Steinberg's, the supermarket, and how they have, their supermarkets were new. This is 1951, new.
Yeah.
So the supermarkets with the baskets, and you can walk, and the packing thing. So, and she leaves her phone number. So we're in Montreal, she's in Montreal. I phone her. I say, what a coincidence, you know, that you found me. What's it like? And she writes in Montreal, she writes about the phone. So don't tell her I'm in Montreal. She thinks I'm calling from Brooklyn. I said, we've got to get together. Suppose, let's make a date to meet in Plattsburgh. Plattsburgh
Sure.
is
Yeah,
it?
I know exactly where Plattsburgh is.
Let's make a date. And she says, what, you crazy American? I'm going to drive to Plattsburgh just to go to a movie with you? I string her along for a while, and finally I tell her, we're in Montreal, we're about half a mile away from you. We have a wonderful year in Montreal. There's Ethel and Arieh, the Vereds, and I'm the one with the car, and the weekend we take trips, and we go moving together. We have a really
It's an amazing city, Montreal.
we have a lovely time for the year.
Did you ever have any more problems with the FBI?
No, I'm in Canada now.
No, but after
No follow-up.
No follow-up.
Well,
Because that was a very scary period.
Wait a minute. I said that to Howard because there was a follow-up. Nothing direct. We had a wonderful time, and when I'm in Montreal, I'm now qualified to write an exam, a specialty exam. At that time, there were two levels. You could be a diplomate in orthopedic surgery, or you could be a fellow of the Royal Society, which is a higher level. They both enable you to work as an orthopedic surgeon in Canada. While I'm in Montreal, I write the exam to be a diplomat. They won't allow me to write the specialty exam as a fellow because they say I haven't had enough training. They want me to do another year of general surgery. I write back to them, I've done all this and that, and they say, all right, do 6 months of general surgery and then you can write the exam. That summer, this is the summer of 53, I guess. I think of 53. Marilyn and I take my car and we're going to tour through southern Ontario. We decided we're going to live in Canada, and southern Ontario is probably one of the nicest parts, the warmest parts. It's within reach of New York, where the family is, and so on. So we're going to drive through southern Ontario and exploring where I could practice. Marilyn writes to the Jewish organizations, and she gets names and addresses in different towns, in Peterborough, in Niagara, in London, and Halifax. I didn't want to live in a big city now. I never looked in Toronto. And that summer we drive through, visiting and interviewing doctors, or preferably Jewish doctors. What's the prospect? And we come to London. London we're interested in, but particularly because, Stratford, Ontario, with the theatre. This is the second year of the theatre in Montreal in Stratford. Yeah. It's a 45-minute drive from Montreal, and we have tickets for the Stratford Theatre. We go to London, and I interview one of the hospital. They're desperate looking for residents, because they've had a little political quarrel with the chief of the university chief, and the medical school in London, but the students are boycotting St. Joseph's Hospital, the Catholic hospital. So here I'm really well qualified, and I need 6 months, and they welcome me with open arms. So that's nice. How I come to London.
How long did you spend in London, Ontario?
Nearly 40 years.
Nearly
36 years.
And then you
we go to Stratford.
And then you retired there.
Well, I've been in London. I do my 6 months, and then I write my fellowship, and I get my fellowship, and then I can hang up a shingle, and I can practice, and I practice the orthopedic surgery.
Before we wanted to practice, we wanted to go back to Israel.
Oh yeah. In the meantime, I'm working in the Shriners Hospital. The Korean War is on. I want to go back to Israel, and because of the Korean War, I think maybe we won't be able to buy any equipment because of the war. There'll be a shortage. So in New York, we get in touch with an organization that sells 220-volt electric things, and we buy an electric refrigerator, freezer,
excuse me,
radio, sewing machine, and other electric things, and they put it in storage. Stupid, and looking back, but this is what we did. So we're ready to go back to Israel. We have all the major electrical appliances. Meantime, there's a strike in Israel. The doctors are on strike. We've got no money, the doctors are on strike. Of course, we can't afford to go there. And meantime, I've got this thing in London. So we stay in London. What are we going to do with all the stuff we bought in New York for $220? So we get them to ship the refrigerator and the sewing machine and the radio and the microwave up to us. It turns out the refrigerator is a 120-volt refrigerator with a transformer. The sewing machine also, and the radio, yeah, we could use them.
Yeah.
There were a few things we couldn't use, but I don't know what we do. We sold them. But at least we had some stuff for our apartment in London. And I'm working in the first 6 months as a resident, and then I write my fellowship, and then I'm a specialist. Marilyn worked first in the hospital.
Well, we'll talk about Marilyn definitely separately. And then you retire.
I worked there until...
Almost 40 years, yeah?
I retired because of my age.
Okay.
Family doctors can work till they drop, but surgeons, aren't allowed to, usually till about 75, in the operating room, to make room for younger
Sure.
people. I was able to go until I was 78 and then had to retire. I could have continued working just as a in the office, but
No.
it's
So
no
you-
fun.
And then you moved to Toronto.
So then I retired. I moved to Toronto, where two of my children are. The children, Marilyn, perhaps tell you about the children. And I work in there in London. Actually, I moved
Toronto.
in Toronto. Actually, for several years, for about 5 years, I work in one of the hospitals as assisting a surgeon. So if you're just an assistant, you can work past the age till I'm 80-something, and then they say no more. And then things happen. Then things happen to bring me to Israel.
When you, this whole time that you were living in Toronto, in London, Ontario,
Yeah.
did you guys ever come back to Israel to visit?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we come for vacation sometimes.
So you maintained a contact.
Yes, we have.
You
Yeah.
maintained a relationship with the country.
Meantime, my twin brother has moved to Israel, and he's living in Beersheba. And he's married and he has children in Beersheba.
Oh, he died.
No, that's now. So I have contacts. With my brother, it was actually, there were more family quarrels, and though we did have minimal contact for quite a long time, there was a lot of friction
Between you and your brother.
between me and my brother, mainly because he married a non-Jew.
Okay.
And
you brought her here to live here?
yeah, they later recovered. She later converted. But there was some friction which I inherited really from the family in England. They were very, very difficult.
When you think about, we're going to end with this question, but this is a philosophical question I want to ask you.
Yeah.
When you think about you coming here in 1948 at the age of 24, correct?
Yes.
24? And taking part in this historical event, the War of Independence, how do you explain it now? When you look back at your life, when you look back at the actions that you did, when you look back at
everything that happened?
Yeah, but you know, it's 65, 67 years after.
Yeah.
Can you describe it? Can you
I've been thinking about it since the interview.
Okay.
Looking back, I can say clearly when I came to Israel in 48, I came partly because I was running away from home.
Okay.
As my mother did, even before. That was probably a prime motive, though I didn't recognize it. I was aware of it, but I didn't think it was so important. I think it was very important. And the fact that I was a communist and didn't want to fight a war against Russia, they're the main reasons, not from Zionist ideology. Zionist ideology maybe came later, but it was for other reasons, but I think I was very blessed that these things happened that directed my life, and I regard it almost as a very great blessing, a very fortunate circumstance that fashioned my life really without my realizing it, without my knowing it or knowing the reason. I was very fortunate. I think I've had a very lucky life.
When you think back about your part in the 48 war,
is it clear to you that you did what you had to do, that it's not something you regret?
No, not at all. On the contrary, I think it was a wonderful time of my life. I can honestly say I enjoyed it. And it was a blessing for me. I wasn't involved in any contact, any swashbuckling. I never handled a rifle or anything, but it was a great adventure, and I was very fortunate to have been involved.
When you look at Israel today in 2015,
yeah.
What are the things that worry you?
I don't see any solution to the conflict certainly not in my lifetime, but probably not in generations. Whether it will ever be solved, or whether we're condemned to just go on living in a state of war for another 100 years, I think that the idea that the war has been 60, 70 years is wrong. The war's been going on since the 1930s in one way or another, and it's likely to go on, I think.
And what do you think about socially in this country?
My political philosophy has reversed completely.
Okay. So you're no longer a communist.
Oh no. I don't think I was foolish to be a communist. I think I was idealistic, and I think young people tend to be idealistic. I think I was being manipulated. But I think today, if anybody's a communist, they need to have their head examined, because we now know whatever the theory says, it doesn't happen.
I understand, but my question was more about Israel as a country, not if it's a capitalist or communist, but socially. Like, do you still, like, when you came here for that year in 1948, 49, and you volunteered here to work in the hospital and to help the war effort in any way that you could, it was in the hospital, in a medical way, but you helped.
Yeah.
You took part in something. There was a generation of the 1948 people. That's a generation.
Yeah.
Do you see that in today's Israel, that kind of sense of being together, and what do you see?
I think it's easy to be influenced by today's headlines. The headlines don't tell the whole story. I think basically Israel is a miraculous country, and I fundamentally believe that it still it will continue to be a miraculous country. It's got all kinds of faults, particularly with some of the people and with the politics. But despite it all, it's a real privilege, I feel, to live here, and I think almost in a messianic sense that I think somehow Israel will survive and thrive.
Stanley, I want to thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure. For me, it's been extraordinary to relive these years as much as I can. My memory is not good for any details, but just the highlights. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Is there anything that you feel that we didn't touch that you want to talk about, or is there anything?
No, I feel we covered things pretty well.
Okay, good.
Marilyn will probably fill in on a lot of stuff. I'm not too emotional, and I'm
We'll start.